In 1684, Edmund Halley, a young astronomer, asked Newton a question that would refocus his scientific genius on gravity, the mysterious force that binds the universe together.
Truly remarkable invention. Thank you.
Mirror requires work.
My question is this. What kind of curve would be described by the planets, supposing the force of the attraction toward the Sun to be reciprocal to the square of the distance from it?
An ellipse.
An ellipse? How do you know?
I've done the calculation.
You have? How did you calculate it?
I'll show you. There should be here somewhere.
Halley's question would change science forever. It caused Newton 3 years' frenzied work.
Don't worry, I will redo the calculations. I'll send you a copy.
Some months later, Halley received a short tract on the motion of planets in orbit. In his hand, Halley had the seeds of Newton's The Principia Mathematica, published in 1687.
It is the greatest book of science ever written, bar none. It is the most magnificent work. It is the most all-encompassing work. It is the most daring book of any scientific treatise ever written.
In the Principia, Newton spelt out the laws of motion, but his greatest achievement, his religious inspiration, was ignored. Descartes had said that light was created when a stream of particles hit the eye. Newton investigated whether light and colour was created in the eye or by the brain. For centuries, philosophers from Aristotle to Descartes thought white light was pure and that colours were produced by modifying white light. Eventually, Newton turned this theory on its head. Using prisms, Newton proved white light is made up of primary colours, the colours of the rainbow. By the late 1660s, word of Newton's extraordinary scientific discoveries spread across Europe, but his religious inspiration was ignored. The creation of the universe.
Whence is it that nature does nothing in vain? And whence arises all that order and beauty which we see in the world? Does it not appear from phenomena that there is a being, incorporeal, living, intelligent, omnipresent, who, in infinite space, as it were in his sensory, sees the things themselves intimately and thoroughly perceives them and comprehends them wholly?
He mocked scientists like Descartes, who saw in a godless world.
Were men and beasts made by fortuitous jumblings of atoms? There'd be many parts useless in them. Here a lump of flesh, there a member too much. Some kinds of beasts might have had but one eye, some more than two. Atoms, mechanical laws, and nothing when compared to the knowledge and wisdom of the Creator.
In 1665 and 1666, Newton had been suspicious of Descartes' mechanical philosophy. There was no role for God. This drove himself to test Descartes' theory. Was the universe really a mass of lifeless matter? He became fascinated by the force that held the moon in orbit and caused apples to fall.
Calculating.
Gravity was the divine force, not a matter of chance. Newton was intrigued. In 18 months he became the greatest mathematician in the world and invented calculus that enabled him to study the movements of planets in later years. The 1687 edition of the Principia only contains one reference to God as creator, but in later editions, Newton stressed the all-powerful role of God in his universe.
The most beautiful system of the sun, planets and comets could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being. God therefore placed the planets at different distances from the sun, so that according to their degrees of density, they may enjoy a greater or lesser proportion of the sun's heat.
This is saying that something on one end, billions of miles away, actually exerts an attraction through all the intervening material on one tiny particle on the other side of that is an extraordinary thought. And in my view, and the view of everybody else who's looked at it, there is simply nothing like that in physics up to that point. Nothing at all.
There's an enormous irony there. In the 18th century, gangs of interpreters, most of them French, will take the God out of, and we will be left with a clockwork universe. I mean, it's a very common image of what it was mechanical, that it was a piece of clockwork, that it really wasn't designed science motivated at all.
To this day, this purely mechanical picture of Newton's universe is still accepted worldwide. But in Jerusalem lies evidence of the scale of deception that has been perpetrated on generations.
What these manuscripts reveal is a very different Newton than most people conceive of. A thinker who had a grand, unified project to uncover truth. This is a Newton who is a calculating scientist. This is revealing Newton in all his glory, if you will. We see his theology, we see God's true doctrines.
Aged just 26, he was made Lucasian Professor of Mathematics. But Newton faced a terrible dilemma the day he had started to climb the academic ladder. He would be required to take holy orders and become a cleric in the Anglican Church. This set him on a collision course that threatened to end in his disgrace. He researched the history of Christianity and became convinced that both the Catholic and the Anglican Church were founded on a corruption of the Word of God.
And Newton comes to the conclusion very early on that the Trinity is a blasphemy on the first commandment, because the first commandment says that thou shalt have no other gods before me, and the worship of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost is a heresy.
So by the early 1670s, he was convinced the doctrine of the Trinity, to which Henry VIII had dedicated Trinity College, was a form of blasphemy.
If Newton had been exposed while he was at Cambridge as an anti-Trinitarian, his career would have been over. He would have been ostracized. It's almost certain that it wouldn't have involved being put to death, but definitely prison would have been one possibility.
Newton would also have risked becoming a target for mobs of heretic hunters, often whipped into a frenzy by the clergy.
You know, they're compromised by the Antichrist. It's the same sort of argument that allows Cromwell to slaughter tens of thousands of Roman Catholic peasants. A heretic, like a witch, we know, from witch hunts that the mob, the people, will take direct action against these sorts of individuals. People are lynched, people are kicked to death, they're burned.
The violence of the times is reflected in Newton's suppressed manuscripts. In these he focuses on the monks who corrupted Christianity by imposing the Trinity.
We can see page after page of material in which the early church fathers, they're actually villains. They're criminals. And in some cases he actually calls them murderers for some of the things that they had done.
When requested to give a lay sermon, Newton used the Bible to condemn the Catholic Church's use of idolatry. torture of nuns he reads about in an ancient history book.
First he commanded ye sacred nuns or virgins to be assembled and searched by midwives, and then hung up with weights at their feet, and tortured with heated plates of iron applied to several parts of their bodies, saying, "Confess to us."
Where tragically awful things happen to Roman Catholic nuns.
Newton studied biblical texts obsessively. He had 30 Bibles in many languages, including Arabic and Hebrew. The books of prophecy, Daniel and Revelation, were his favorite texts, although they were often dismissed for their violent symbolism. Newton felt these contained the words of God and a description of past and future events. From his reading of Revelation, Newton became convinced God foresaw that the Catholics would corrupt pure Christianity. He researched the history of Christianity and became convinced that both the Catholic and the Anglican Church were founded on a corruption of the Word of God.
I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-coloured beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet colour, and decked with gold, and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand, full of abominations and filthiness of fornication. And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of harlots and abominations of the earth.
With a form of fornication. This was spiritual fornication, because if one imagines the pure church as a chaste virgin, then it makes sense to think in terms of the Trinitarian church as a harlot who had committed fornication with corrupt, non-biblical teachings.
The creation of the universe.
Whence is it that nature does nothing in vain? And whence arises all that order and beauty which we see in the world? Does it not appear from phenomena that there is a being, incorporeal, living, intelligent, omnipresent, who, in infinite space, as it were in his sensory, sees the things themselves intimately, and thoroughly perceives them and comprehends them wholly?
He mocked scientists like Descartes, who saw in a godless world.
Were men and beasts made by fortuitous jumblings of atoms? There'd be many parts useless in them. Here a lump of flesh, there a member too much. Some kinds of beasts might have had but one eye, some more than 2. Atoms, mechanical laws, and nothing when compared to the knowledge and wisdom of the Creator.
He refused to take the last sacrament.
Sir Isaac, how was the time for the last sacrament?
No, I will not die in the embrace of a corrupt church. I have made my peace with God.
Newton had accomplished more than any scientist before him.